A core attribute of state sovereignty is ultimate authority over the use of force, more specifically, the authority to command the military. In this respect, South Korea represents a notable anomaly among contemporary sovereign states. In the event of hostilities on the Korean Peninsula, operational control of South Korea's military would pass to a US general. Such arrangements are not unusual for smaller or weaker states. Luxembourg operates within Belgian or NATO command structures through bilateral defense integration. The Marshall Islands and Palau rely on US defense guarantees under compacts of free association. However, South Korea possesses one of the world's most capable and technologically advanced armed forces, so it should be fully capable of commanding its own defense. Yet in wartime, it doesn't. Very crucially, this arrangement is not simply the result of external imposition. South Korean governments themselves have played an active role in sustaining the existing command structure, at times pushing to take back control, but at other times deliberately slowing the process. And this raises a deeper question. Why would a militarily capable sovereign state accept foreign command over its armed forces in wartime? To understand the origins of this arrangement, we need to go back in time. When the Republic of Korea was established in 1948, operational control of its military was placed under the US Army commander in Korea. This was formally justified as a stabilizing measure during early state building, especially amid emerging military threat from the north. But behind the scenes, the US was equally wary of the South Korean leadership. President Syngman Rhee, much like Kim Il-sung, pledged to reunify the peninsula by force. So US officials worried that a fully autonomous South Korean military could drag the US into a war it did not want. Then in June 1950, the North launched a full-scale surprise invasion. The South Korean military, which was unprepared and severely outmatched, was rapidly pushed back, and soon the US was drawn into a major war on the peninsula. Amid the chaos, Rhee formally transferred South Korean forces to a US-led United Nations command for the duration of the war. After the armistice, South Korea sought the restoration of full military command authority. The Eisenhower administration, however, made clear that continued US defense commitments were conditional on the US retaining wartime operational control. This understanding was eventually codified in the agreed minutes signed alongside the 1954 Mutual Defense Treaty, which preserved the authority of the United Nations Command. The logic behind this arrangement was shaped by wartime experience. During the war, Rhee repeatedly challenged US authority. He pulled units out of UNC control, created parallel security forces, and even unilaterally released anti-communist prisoners to sabotage armistice negotiations. So from the American perspective, autonomous South Korean wartime command risked renewed escalation. Therefore, managing South Korea's behavior became just as important to the alliance as deterring North Korean aggression. And this imperative was institutionalized throughout the Cold War. We can see this in the evolution of the command structure. Even with the establishment of the Combined Forces Command in 1978, and despite South Korea's recovery of peacetime operational control in 1994, wartime operational control remained firmly in US hands. While the early decades of the alliance were shaped by US concerns over control, the post-Cold War period reframed the issue around when, under what conditions South Korea could assume wartime operational command. You see, despite decades of rhetoric calling for greater military autonomy, US wartime command gradually stopped looking like a constraint and started functioning as a mechanism of reassurance. With an American general embedded at the core of the wartime command structure, American involvement in any major conflict on the peninsula is automatic, and this reduces the risk of political hesitation in Washington over whether intervention is justified or desirable, a dynamic well understood by South Korean policymakers. And of course, restoring full wartime operational control wouldn't lead to abandonment overnight. Nevertheless, it would change the dynamics of the alliance, raising questions about burden sharing, escalation management, and the extent to which a war on the Korean Peninsula should be understood as primarily South Korea's responsibility. These concerns have historically been most pronounced among conservative governments in Seoul, particularly as North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities have expanded. At the same time, South Korea's own domestic politics were evolving. As the country democratized, the idea of a foreign general at the center of wartime command became increasingly difficult to justify domestically. Progressive administrations began to frame wartime operational control as a question of political legitimacy. How could a country with one of the world's most advanced militaries still lack formal authority over its own forces in wartime? And on top of that, the indefinite retention of US wartime control started to look like a political liability, particularly during periods of engagement with North Korea or in situations where Seoul and Washington weren't fully aligned. American reassurance alone couldn't resolve this tension, so the alliance needed an institutional mechanism to manage the issue. That mechanism emerged in 2014 when the two sides agreed to a conditions-based approach to wartime operational control transition. Rather than setting a fixed timeline, the handover would depend on meeting a set of agreed benchmarks. The first, initial operational capability, testing whether South Korea can plan and carry out wartime operations within the combined command. Then full operational capability, testing whether it can lead the combined forces during a high-intensity conflict. And finally, full mission capability, the point at which both sides agree that the alliance is ready for the transfer. So where does this leave the alliance today? In October 2025, South Korean president signaled his intention to complete the wartime OPCON transfer within his 5-year term. US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has welcomed the objective, aligning it with long-standing arguments that allies should assume greater responsibility for their own defense. Military voices, however, have been more cautious. The commander of US Forces Korea has emphasized the need to safeguard the readiness and effectiveness of the combined force. This is partly about the continued advancement of North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities and also about the bigger picture, especially amid intensifying US-China strategic competition in the Indo-Pacific. Looking ahead, the most likely trajectory is one of incremental change. South Korea is likely to assume greater responsibility for its own defense while continuing to invest in its capabilities. At the same time, fundamental command architecture is unlikely to change in the near term. A US 4-star general would remain at the top of the combined command, and important military decisions would continue to be closely coordinated with Washington. And this aligns with the interests of all sides. Progressives can point to a pathway towards sovereignty, conservatives can continue to rely on the reassurance provided by American presence, and the US can endorse the transition in principle as it turns its attention to regions elsewhere. In this sense, US wartime command persists because it continues to address specific alliance management problems that neither side has fully resolved. And that is the real story behind US wartime command of South Korea's military.